The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
Well, greetings, family. Welcome, one and all, to another episode of Walking Through the Language of the Heart with myself and Chris S. This is the show where we really do walk through these amazing letters written by Bill W. They're actually articles written for the Grapevine from 1944 to 1970. We've been going through this. We've been doing this for several weeks now, and we are about to dig into Tradition 5 and probably into Tradition 6 and kind of see where this goes. Chris, welcome aboard as usual. How is it out there on the east area of the world?
Well, Monty, good to see you here tonight. It's snowing, so we had about 3 or 4 inches of snow. Now it's raining, and it's going to probably freeze, and we'll be able to skate around tomorrow. So
yeah, there you go. All righty.
What's going on here? All
right, so launch us forth, my friend.
All right. So what we've been doing for anybody that might be new is Monty, you and I are exploring these essays, these articles that Bill wrote for the Grapevine. We're kind of exploring them with fresh eyes. Neither you or I have studied these or have a specific pitch to do. We want to kind of explore these particular articles, like they're almost like they're brand new.
Yeah,
but they're not. The article, the reading that we're going to do today is from April 1948. So it's a long time ago. But Bill was putting into the Grapevine all his thoughts and all his directions and his perspective and his lessons learned. And he was just really putting some great stuff in the Grapevine. And I know you as well as me have just really been amazed at how much great material is in this book. And it's been a lot of fun. So, tonight we're on Tradition 5. Now, what Tradition 5? I'm just gonna read the long form of what Tradition 5 ended up being. I think it's kind of still under construction, the article that we're going to read today. But Tradition 5 is each Alcoholics Anonymous group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. So that's the long form of Tradition 5. So if it's all right with you, I'll just start reading, and we'll see what's in store for us and everyone else from April 1948, Tradition 5.
All right.
So it says the old proverb, "Shoemaker, stick to thy last." Trite, yes, but very true for us of AA. How well we need to heed the principle that it is better to do one thing supremely well than many things badly. This is money, this is really the tradition that let's just concentrate on alcoholism. there was some lessons to be learned in the Washingtonians that I believe Bill had been exposed to by 1948. And the lesson of the Washingtonians was the Washingtonians were a group of drunks from Baltimore who got together to stay sober, to help each other stay sober, and stay sober they did, and they started the Washingtonians. And that group of drunks grew in a 5-year period of time from 5 or 6 drunks to hundreds of thousands of potentially sober members of the Washingtonians. But because they got involved in so many of what we would consider outside issues, like prohibition, the abolition of slavery, all kinds of stuff, because the Washingtonians were in the mid-1800s. They got involved in so many things, and people, there was no traditions, there was no guidelines, there was no guardrails. They blew themselves up. In about 5 or 8 years, the Washingtonians were basically no more. So the lesson of a very impactful and very important fellowship exploding, was something I believe Bill understood and wanted to protect us against. So it says here, because it has now become plain enough that only a recovered alcoholic can do much for a sick alcoholic, a tremendous responsibility has descended upon us all, an obligation so great that it amounts to a sacred trust. For to our kind, those who suffer alcoholism, recovery is a matter of life or death. So the Society of Alcoholics Anonymous cannot, it dare not, ever be diverted from its primary purpose. And today, many, many people are primary purpose adherents. Shoemaker, stick to thy last is kind of a euphemism, but let's keep first things first. Let's keep it simple. Let's deal here with alcoholism. And I love how he uses the word in here, recovered.
Yeah.
He uses the word recovered. That doesn't show up in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, but that's very interesting, isn't it, Monty?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, when I'm working with somebody, that's one of those words I have them use their highlighter for. Whenever it says recovered, recovering, recover, I have them highlighted. Because we're going to talk about that at some point, because that little bit of controversy is going to pop up every once in a while, the old argument between recovered and recovering and that kind of thing. Here's my question for you. Would you say that the primary purpose trumps everything?
I say the primary purpose should be paramount. It should be paramount for the organization or the society. So, personal members, might see their relationship with God as being the most important thing. But if we're looking at the health of the society,
right?
Bill is saying we need to stick with alcoholism, to stay sober and help others recover from alcoholism is a primary purpose. Now there's some people that take the primary purpose and stretch it out a little. There are a number of people who believe that drug addicts shouldn't be in AA. There's people who look at this primary purpose and kind of expand on what Bill is saying here. And, I personally believe that I can be uniquely helpful to an alcoholic, someone who has a real drinking problem. That doesn't mean I can't be helpful here, there, or everywhere, but consistently I can be uniquely helpful to someone who has a real alcohol history. And it's not like I haven't tried, trying to help other people. I believe what Bill says here. If I focus on being helpful and helping other people recover from alcoholism, I'm in the right lane. How do you feel about that, Monty?
Well, I think, the abuse of alcohol, for instance, as is the abuse of narcotics or pornography or overspending or overeating. I mean, what we're talking about are symptoms, right? And so I think when we address, at least it's been my experience, when I'm addressing alcoholism as a symptom and we're digging deeper through the step process to find out what's fueling that, I think when a person really does the work, I think those other issues, I think they get addressed kind of automatically. I think they just kind of fall into place. My issue with resentments or expectations, if you will, they kind of fall into place with everything that's a symptom in my life. And, when I read this tradition, each group has but one primary purpose, and then it says what it is, to carry its message. Sometimes I have to wonder in today's fellowships if we have a true understanding of what that message is. I personally believe it's the message of the spiritual disciplines that are in the 12 steps. That's what I believe the message is. But I think some people might have different opinions about that.
Yeah, and different opinions are legal.
That's right.
I happen to agree. I happen to agree with you. I believe the message is have a spiritual awakening as the result of the 12 steps, and you can be recovered from alcoholism. That's what I believe the message is. But there's many ways to say it. There's many ways to carry that message, and I really try to just pay attention to what I'm doing, and listen, there are a lot of things that go on because there's a completely open door in all these fellowships that have traditions. There's a completely open door. You're going to get a plethora of opinions and perspectives and advice and all kinds of things. I think you're going to be lucky if you find an informed and experienced guide or sponsor in any of these particular fellowships you may wish to join. I think you're going to be very well served if you find someone experienced with the steps. They've actually done the steps. And informed on things like the traditions and the concepts and how to behave in this recovery world. And I also, Monty, agree with you about the symptoms. Drug addiction can be a symptom. Alcoholism can be a symptom. Sex addiction can be a symptom. Gambling can be a symptom. Foods can be a symptom. Drugs can be a symptom. I believe in what Chuck C. used to say. He used to say, I have one problem, and within that problem are all my other problems, and I have one solution, and within that solution is all the other solutions I might need. And my one problem is separation from God.
Yeah.
And the solution, and within that separation from God is all this other stuff.
Yep.
And the solution is connection to God, and within that connection is the solution to all my other problems. So I truly believe that. But I also believe I'm uniquely useful to help alcoholics because alcoholism was the thing that I suffered from. I suffered from an inability to control my drinking or stay away from alcohol. So I can identify with someone who has that same thing. Now, is the solution the same? I believe the 12-step solution is the solution for over 200 12-step groups. But I also think it's important to have that identification, or else it's just, you're just taking advice from somebody.
True.
If you truly believe that the person is exactly like you are and has suffered the way you have, you might lock in to following those suggestions at a deeper level. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely does. When I'm working with somebody, and I volunteer out at a facility that works with multiple symptoms. Let's put it that way. But when I sit down with a guy and we have come to the conclusion in his innermost being that this guy is an alcoholic, there is a connection there that is different than somebody that is dealing with another issue. Let's say gambling, for instance. I'm a bit of a normie, I guess you would call me. I don't know that there are any normies, but I guess for lack of a better term, I'm kind of one when it comes to the gambling scene. I have no attraction to it. The only reason that I get it to any degree is because I get addiction better than I did before I learned about it, but I don't get the draw of all the lights that's a marketing scheme by the gambling industry, the lights and the sirens and the colors and everything. They understand addiction very well and they hone in on that. I don't get that. I don't understand what the draw is to a room that says no smoking, but it's filled with smoke anyway. And you sit down and you just keep pouring money. I don't get that. But if I line it up to the way I drank, I do kind of get it, but not like the gambling addict would get it. I'm not going to identify with him like I am with the alcoholic.
Yeah, and that identification is important. I
Sure.
believe so. So, third paragraph here, it says, temptations to do otherwise will come aplenty. What temptations are they talking about? Getting involved in other things, trying to help, in different ways, different people. It says, seeing fine works afoot in the field of alcohol, we shall be sorely tempted to loan out the name and credit of Alcoholics Anonymous to them. As a movement, we shall be beset to finance and endorse other causes. Should our present success continue, people will commence to assert that AA is a brand new way of life, maybe a new religion, capable of saving the world. We shall be told it is in our bounden duty to show modern society how it ought to live. That's a little bit extravagant prose there. But in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill was getting a lot of that. Bill, there was feedback from people in the program who'd had their lives completely transformed from being a drunken sot to being a working member, a viable member of society. And they're like, hey, let's, there were even people, non-alcoholics, who were paying attention to Alcoholics Anonymous who thought that. There was a Herbert Hoover was making a speech one time. And he said, if only everybody, this is like in the 40s or something, right? If only everybody would live the way the people in Alcoholics Anonymous lived, the world would be a better place. There's even like politicians who were believing that stuff. But Bill knew better. He knew better. He knew we needed to stay in our lane. He knew we needed to stay in our lane. So it says here, oh, how very attractive these projects and ideas can be. How flattering to imagine that we might be chosen to demonstrate that old mystic promise. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. Fantastic, you say? Yet some of our well-wishers have begun to say such things. Fortunately, most of us are convinced that these are perilous speculations, alluring ingredients of that new heady wine we are now being offered, each bottle marked success. Of this subtle vintage, may we never drink too deeply. May we never forget that we live by the grace of God on borrowed time, that anonymity is better than acclaim, that for us as a movement, poverty is better than wealth. Such deep wisdom.
Yeah.
And this comes from a man who proclaimed, he proclaimed that he was the type of personality that needed to be the number one guy everywhere. He needed to be the number one person in the orchestra. He needed to be the captain of the basketball team. He needed to be, in charge of his men in war. He needed to go to Wall Street and become a millionaire. He needed to be the number one guy. And for him to be able to touch on this humility at this kind of level, I really think it was so helpful and so prophetic for the security of the fellowship, that he looked at it like this. Because I don't know about you, but I've met a lot of people. I've met a lot of people in recovery who've got a really good idea. You know what I mean? Hey, let's do this. And he's kind of cautioning us. He's kind of cautioning us about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it says here, and we may reflect with ever deepening conviction that we shall never be at our best, except when we hew only to the primary spiritual aim of AA, that of carrying its message to the alcoholic who still suffers from alcoholism. And, back to what is the message? Now, I don't know if I've told you this story, Monty. I probably did, but I was really good friends with someone who was a DCM in an area like up in New England. And, he was a big book guy, and he was young, and he was ambitious and curious and everything else. And he got involved with some of the people we know, some of the big book study people we know. And, he caught on fire. And being in that service structure, he noticed that that the convention that was coming up, the catchphrase for the world convention was going to be "carry this message." So his question to Riverside Avenue, which would be the general service office, was, could you be specific on what this message is? He asked that question. He shot it up the flagpole. Now, like a lot of things that, like a lot of questions like that go to New York, they're going to dodge and weave. They don't want to be painted into a corner. But he kept asking and kept asking, and they kept dodging and weaving and dodging and weaving. And finally, the answer that they gave him, to me, was a little disturbing. The answer they gave was, this message is anything your group wants it to be. That came right out of New York. Now, Monty, I don't know about you, but I've seen some groups that I don't want them defining my message.
No.
And then there are some groups where there's people who are really informed and really experienced. But I'd be afraid to let Wally, come up with a message. And that's what his group, that's what's going to be his group's message. But again, there's so much freedom in Alcoholics Anonymous. You have the right to be wrong. You have the right to break the traditions. You have more of a right to break the traditions than Alcoholics Anonymous has to come and punish you for doing so. So again, that's kind of the point there.
It seems like when you hear a story like that, it seems that would just turn into a train wreck. And yet, because of the freedom, it doesn't. And I mean, there might be a couple of boxcars that fall off here and there, but it doesn't seem, we've talked about it before. We've recovered from so many things and grown and matured. And I don't know if I share with you, but there was a series, Little House on the Prairie, years ago. There was an episode where the townspeople were all up in arms because I think it was Chairman Mao's Little Red Book or something happened to get into the hands of the townsfolk, and they were like, we got to burn that, right? And so burning one book turned into this giant bonfire, and they were bringing all sorts of books that were supposedly inappropriate and everything and throwing them on this fire. And the preacher, he was leading the charge, right? And he stepped over to the fire to throw another book in, and he looked down, and in the middle of the fire, he was shocked, and he pulled out this little black book, and he blew the ashes off of it, and it was the Bible. And the lesson in that was the whole idea of freedom of speech and freedom of press. You know, when you start doing that, when you start putting all these rules like that on, you end up shooting yourself in the foot. And I think because God is in this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, and he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's not surprised with our boo-boos and our goof-ups, that he is perfectly capable of keeping this thing together without us making things so stringent that nobody can breathe, right? And so I don't think these goof-ups that we have or these supposed possible train wrecks, I don't think they turn into them, because I think, once again, God knows what he's doing, and it's everybody. Chill out.
You know, the society has survived, and I don't see it disappearing like the Washingtonians. I just don't see that happening. There's too many people with vital spiritual experiences to share, and there's a deep need to share that vital spiritual experience, and we need a platform to do that. You know, so I don't think it's going away, but I am really grateful for him putting together some guidelines for us, so that we don't make some of the mistakes.
Sure.
Maybe it tempers us so that we don't go too deep into some of these things, like you know what would be great to do, Monty? Let's start manufacturing Bill W. Near beer, you know, or some crazy thing like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, I do have a Bill W. Bobblehead. You know, I went that far.
Yeah, I've seen.
But anyway,
I've seen those. Let me one more thing I want to say though. There are the people that I have met that are the people that are like cemented in tradition stone so deeply that there's no flexibility about them at all. They don't seem to stick around.
Yeah, because these are spiritual principles. They're not legal.
Right.
These are spiritual principles. They're not mechanical principles. You know, one must leave room for God. The whole point of a spiritual principle is that it brings you closer to God when practiced. You know, so again, you can be too mechanical.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. All right, let's go to Tradition 6, Monty, and I'm going to read the long form of Tradition 6. So, and again, remember, this is what it ended up being, and then we're going to go into what Bill wrote in 1948. But Tradition 6 is problems of money, property, and authority may easily divert us from our primary spiritual aim. We think, therefore, that any considerable property of genuine use to AA should be separately incorporated and managed, thus dividing the material from the spiritual. An AA group as such should never go into business. Secondary aids to AA, such as clubs or hospitals, which require much property or administration, ought to be incorporated and to be set apart if necessary. They can be freely discarded by the groups. Hence, such facilities ought not to use the AA name. Their management should be the sole responsibility of those people who financially support them. For clubs, AA managers are usually preferred, but hospitals as well as other places of recuperation ought to be well outside AA and medically supervised. While an AA group may cooperate with anyone, such cooperation ought never to go so far as affiliation or endorsement, actual or implied. An AA group can bind itself to no one. So that's what Tradition 6 became in the long form. Let's see what he's talking about in May 1948. What do you say, Mike?
All righty.
All right, tradition 6. The 6th of our 12 points of AA tradition is deemed so important that it states at length that the relation of the AA movement in money and property. This tradition declares in substance that the accumulation of money, property, and the unwanted personal authority so often generated by material wealth comprise a cluster of serious hazards against which an AA group must ever be on guard. Tradition 6 also enjoins the group never go into business nor ever to lend the AA name or money credit to any outside enterprise, no matter how good. Strongly expressed is the opinion that even clubs should not bear the AA name, that they ought to be separately incorporated and managed by those individual AAs who need or want clubs enough to financially support them. This really is a protective mechanism, and there's probably been more violations of this tradition than one can imagine. Alcoholics Anonymous itself has become a very, very large entity, and their prudent reserve is somewhere around $18 to $20 million. And what a prudent reserve is like 6 months operating expenses. So that shows you that there is a ton of money that's going into this stuff. Now, in 1948, there wasn't. There was not a lot of money. So I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm not saying it's good. It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
But Bill saw that as something that was unsafe. You know what I mean? There's risk in having huge amounts of money or property or anything like that, because it's just human nature that the people that are in positions to move the money or property might have an outsized voice in how things are done. And if you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, it's like we only get the one vote, in a group conscience meeting or a business meeting, and that really is the way it should be. God is supposed to speak to us through an informed group conscience. So he's protecting ourselves, but not every 12-step group decided not to have property. I know Al-Anon went after a ton of property, and it flipped out a lot of the members of Al-Anon. They thought it was a huge affront to this particular tradition, but people who were buying the property for the headquarters didn't much care. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So no one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. I think that can be true with these traditions too, unfortunately. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All right. We would thus divide the spiritual from the material, confine the AA movement to its sole aim, and ensure, however wealthy as individuals we may become, that AA itself shall always remain poor. We dare not risk the distractions of corporate wealth. Years of experience have proven these principles beyond doubt. They've become certainties, absolute verities for us. Thank God we AAs have never yet been caught in the kind of religious or political disputes which embroil the world of today. But we ought to face the fact that we have often quarreled violently about money, property, and the administration thereof. Money and quantity has always been a baleful influence in group life. Let a well-meaning donor present at an AA group with a sizable sum and we break loose. Nor does trouble abate until that group as such somehow disposes of its bankroll. This experience is practically universal. But, say our friends, isn't this a confession of weakness? Other organizations do a lot of good with money. Why not AA? Of course, we of AA would be the first to say that many a fine enterprise does a lot of good with a lot of money. to these efforts. Money is usually primary. It is their livelihood, but money is not the lifeblood of AA. With us, it is very secondary. Even in small quantities, it is scarcely more than a necessary nuisance, something we wish we could do without entirely. Why is that so? I'm thinking of treasuries in groups that I've been a part of over the years. And for the most part, when it gets to $200 or $300 or $400, the money goes out. Yeah, that's really the instructions. The money goes out. But every once in a while, a treasurer will be lazy and he'll say, well, we have $2,000, in the bank. And people will be like, get rid of it. Get rid of it. You know what I mean? It's a necessary nuisance in that we must pay rent. We must have coffee. We must have literature at the literature table. There's certain things that we need, but it's not a lot of money. Usually the places that rent us space have done so at a huge discount.
Oh my, yeah.
I got to tell you, most of the churches that have meetings up in my area, the rent probably doesn't even cover the heating cost for that 1 hour period of time. They're very, very generous with the fellowship. So the treasury can remain low. And, we've been putting $1 in the basket, Monty, since like 1962.
Yeah.
That was about the last time you heard metal money go into the basket. and it has not been corrected for inflation as far as I know. So money is kind of secondary to the spiritual aim. When there wasn't places to meet because of COVID, because the facilities were locking you out, people were meeting in parking lots, people were meeting in fields, people were meeting, at the beach. Doesn't cost anything to do that. That's what's the most important thing. I think the unity, the ability to fellowship. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there is. I saw something happen that was really a blessing, but a couple people had an issue with it. There's always a couple people that have an issue with something, right? And that is,
Yes.
this idea that an AA group ought never be hosted by a person in their personal home, because then there tends to be control issues and blah, 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 blah. And I've heard that philosophy before. But when the COVID thing happened, I watched several people open up their backyards. One particular group was my home group, and start a bonfire meeting. And they had it outside. That way, if you wanted to wear a mask, there wasn't an issue with that. If you didn't, there wasn't an issue with that. Nobody even brought it up. We're outside. The bonfire meeting went well into the beginning of winter, and we would have some drizzles, and we still loved it until we couldn't anymore, and then we moved inside again. But they were not about to stop the flow of the availability of the gathering of members. And so they did that. And I understand the Zoom thing. My hat goes off to the people that hosted those. My hat goes off to the people that opened up their backyards. My hat goes off to all of them. It was a very difficult and trying time.
I've got a couple of experiences that I'll share. In 1992, I became part of a group, and it's because I resented myself out of a number of groups that I ended up becoming part of this group. But it had been in the 1980s. They changed it before I got there, but it had been in the 1980s a Republican AA group, believe it or not.
Really?
And some wise people decided, you just can't do that, right? You're splitting the population in half that you're trying to help. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So, but what they were doing is they had a Sunday night speaker meeting at a big church. A lot of people went. They had a Wednesday night step meeting at a smaller church. Fewer people went. And they had a Friday night discussion meeting, and it was at people's homes. And they would announce at the other two groups that the Friday meeting will be at Pierre's house, right? And if you don't know how to get there, we'll be meeting at the train station at 7:30, and we'll be driving up there for the 8 o'clock meeting. And they thought that was very, very inclusive, right? Well, we ended up, I went to maybe 4 or 5 home meetings, and then some of us got together and said, this isn't inviting enough. It's not inviting enough. You can't put it in the meeting book. You know what I mean? Like people might be really, really uncomfortable, like going to the train station and following somebody to somebody's house. So we voted to meet at a church, but groups have been making decisions like that forever, and it's not like it's wrong. It's like that there's a better way to do it, and very often the group conscience is going to guide the group in the right direction. And certainly in my experience in that group, opening it up to the public instead of just Republicans was, how the group conscience went. And meeting at a church where people could feel, especially newcomers, could feel more comfortable going was the right decision. And the group conscience, guided by God, directed the group in that direction.
Yeah.
So, these are recoverable errors.
Yes.
Like you were talking about earlier, they're recoverable errors.
Yeah.
There's so much, God's got this thing. And, we just got to stop being in the way long enough,
right?
Sometimes for that to happen.
Yeah.
All right. It says here, we explain this easily enough. We don't need money. The core of our AA procedure is one alcoholic talking to another, whether that be sitting on a curbstone in a home or at a meeting. It's the message, not the place. It's the talk, not the alms, that does our work. Just places to meet and talk. That's all about all AA needs. Beyond these, a few small offices, a few secretaries at their desks, a few dollars a piece a year, easily met by volunteer contributions. Trivial indeed, our expenses, until you have an $18 million prune reserve. But listen, there's translation departments, and there's all kinds of stuff going on now. So
yeah,
I don't begrudge them, the money, as long as they're not, wasting it foolishly. So it says, nowadays the AA group answers its well-wishers saying, our expenses are trifling. As good earners, we can easily pay them. As we neither need nor want money, why risk its hazards? We'd rather stay poor. Thanks, just the same. So, that is a very, very cool early version of what ended up, being polished up a little bit and put in the book 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. And it was very interesting reading that, Monty.
Yeah, I reflect on the whole mentality of when God calls you to it, he'll provide the means for you to do it. It just is the truth. It's like with Take 12 Radio. We've talked about this before. We started this thing with no funds. We still basically have no funds, but we have everything we need to get the job done. No more. And we don't need any more than that. We just don't. It's a blessing. It's less is more. And in the less is really an enormous amount of freedom when you don't have that burden. And there's a lot of people that don't get that. And there's a lot of people that do. And the people that get that get to bask in the freedom of not having the burden of being trapped by money and the love of money and the, what are we going to do with it? Oh my gosh, we got to spend it, or we got to save it, or gee whiz. No, thank you. I'm with AA on that. Yeah, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
It's nice to have nice things, but when those things are calling the shots. I mean, I remember somebody saying years ago, and I never forgot it, I needed to learn to be thankful for what I already had. We have so much. We really do. I mean, my goodness, starting with our sanity has returned. The alcohol problem does not exist. You know, that kind of thing. Talk about freedom. And it came about by God's providence and providing a place, whether it's a curbside, a house, or a meeting hall, or a phone call where we can just sit and talk to one another. Republican, Democrat, independent, believer, non-believer, pick your poison. You know, we need to be welcoming to all, and in that, all are welcome. And I'm just so grateful for it. Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely.
All right, my brother. Well, that wraps it up for another episode of Walking Through the Language of the Heart. I was looking at this. I was looking at my bookmark. We're making a dent, buddy.
Little by slowly. We're on page 8. We're on page 85 of 400 pages. So we're clipping right along. We'll be at the 25% mark pretty soon.
There you go. There you go. All right, listeners. Listen, if you'd like to catch up on every episode of Walking Through the Language of the Heart, please visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner, and there you will find that. Don't forget, you can subscribe to all of our shows for fun and for free by visiting us at take12radio.com and clicking on any of the major podcasting platforms listed there, or simply search for Take 12 Recovery Radio wherever you get your podcast. All right, until our next show, this is the Monty'man along with Chris and the rest of the Take 12 Recovery Radio family, and we are wishing God's perfect serenity for you. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof, woof.